guys, welcome back to another episode of the Retail Perch. And time's been flying. We've been traveling and we've been attending in-person conferences, and we're finally back in the studio here recording another episode. And Gary, it's been interesting, fun last couple of weeks.
Yes, it has. Yeah, I think we both survived Las Vegas and grocery shop and the NGA show and so on. So it was exciting to be with people again.
Yeah, I know. And I was pretty impressed with how they handled both the shows. I think the whole setup was gave you some sense of security and feeling. I thought it was pretty well handled.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think both organizations did a good job with, following safety protocols, et cetera, and everyone having some sense of, safety, security around it.
Yeah. Anyway, so we're back in the studio here with another amazing guest here on the Retail Perch. And so today we're going to continue some of our discussions. I think this has probably been the most popular topic on our podcast, Gary, talking about wellness and food. And I think there's an increasing trend about being, viewing food as medicine. And I know our guest here has a lot to say about it. So anything you want to say, Gary, before I bring on our guest?
So no, just to build on what you just mentioned, Shekar, I mean, I think we've seen this growing convergence between food and the healthcare or health, over the last, probably 5+ years when this has really taken off, but then absolutely accelerated this whole thing over the past 18 months, due to the pandemic, but a large number of people now taking much more interest in their health and wellness, their immune systems and so on. That directly ties back to what they eat.
Yeah. So Victor Penev here, who's our guest on the Retail Perch today, has an interesting background. He's, I'll let you share some of his details, but, he comes from with an investment banking background all the way into food. And he's going to talk about some of his passion and what drove him in that direction. So Victor, welcome to the Retail Perch.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Should I just dive in?
Absolutely. Yeah, we'd love to hear about your background, your journey. How did you wind up where you are today?
Yeah, I think the underlying theme of my life since I came to the States, which is about 30 years ago, I'm from Bulgaria originally, and I came here for college in 1992. So it's almost 30 years. But ever since, it's been entrepreneurship. And I've started 4 companies. My claim to fame is that I started and sold Bulgaria's largest internet company, co-founded it back in the dawn of internet in 1998. We sold it in 2008. And everything I've done has been a little bit of kind of an exploration of add-ons. After college, I did do a couple years of investment banking to realize very soon that this is not for me. And that I can do greater things in the world by starting businesses. That's when I started that internet company. I've done stints at various media companies, which was a passion of mine back in the day, and still is essentially at the bottom of kind of an entrepreneur at the bottom of starting internet businesses. So I was at the beginning of starting the BMG digital marketing business. Back in the day, we were inventing at the time email marketing. That it was, if you can remember a time before email marketing existed, there was such a time.
Right.
And then for a brief period of time, I ran Playboy's international digital business, which was an interesting exploration on its own. But as life would have it, I went back home to Bulgaria for a few years, ran the company I started, we sold it, and then moved back to the States. And I took a year off and reflected on what I want to do. And one of the things that I've always been passionate about is food. I've been cooking, I think, for the last 30 years, almost every day. And so one day I realized that I'm thinking about 5 or 6 hours a day about food, and might as well just combine my 2 passions of food and tech and see if we can do something meaningful in the world. And at the time, so that's about 10 years ago, the question was, what can we solve with technology that's a big problem in food? And part of it was, well, let's figure out how people are making choice about food. And it turns out that the information about food is very disorganized. contradictory, lacking, just not there when people need it. And so, and this is still the case, by the way, but we set up to organize the world's food knowledge so it can give it back to people so they can make the right food choices. And ultimately, and that's another passion of mine, is health, to live long and healthy lives. We believe that people can live up to 120 without any chronic conditions, without a mental illness. And we know that food is going to be a big part of the solution, alongside sleep, meditation, exercise, and so on. But food is a big part of the solution. So that's what the company has been doing, organizing the world's food knowledge and setting it up in a way that people can use it. And I can start getting into the company now, or
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So tell us about Edamam. What does Edamam do actually now?
Yeah. So Edamam started somewhat naively as a kind of a B2C app. You know, we'll conquer the world. We will provide everybody in the world information about food, and they'll love us and whatnot. But you know, over time we realized, there is no business model there. People do really expect data and information about food to be free. And at the same time, businesses started coming to us and say, well, you have this kind of very accurate, deep data. Can we use it? So we pivoted to a B2B place. And we realized that actually we're going to have a lot more impact this way. We meet the consumer where they make choices about food, whether it's a restaurant, dietitian office, grocery store, everywhere they can decide or are deciding what they should eat. And so we completely pivoted the technology towards B2B. And right now we are providing data as a service solutions to businesses in the food, health, and wellness sectors. And we really spend about 50 times in the food space and 50 times in the health and wellness. So we straddle that divide, so to speak, and we see how the two industries are starting to converge towards one another. And we work with really large companies like Nestle, Barilla, Tyson, on the food side are clients of ours, but also on the health side, Virta Health, Twin Health. We have very advanced conversations with Teladoc, Livongo, CVS, Aetna, and then some of the big tech companies like Microsoft and Amazon are clients of ours, as well as a lot of smaller companies. We offer the data by API or licensing it. And for the API, we have about 3,000, 3,500 subscribers every month that come, and some of them just show up and start building applications on top of our data. So very excited about that, because we are propagating good, high quality data to make the right food choices all over the world.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack there, Gary. So clearly, when you say you're organizing the world's food knowledge, what exactly does that mean?
It's a big, lofty goal. And we've started with a very small portion of it, which is the nutrition data. So right now, what we do is organizing data around foods, and we really think about meals. So there are foods you buy in the grocery store, the foods you buy in the green market, foods you order in a restaurant when you sit down, or delivery, and things that you cook at home. So for us, all those meals, we try to attach known nutrition data, macronutrients, micronutrients, allergen information, appropriateness for lifestyle diets such as paleo, vegan, gluten-free, so on and so forth, and chronic conditions. So this is all known data. Where we're going next is starting to do genotyping of foods. Once you do DNA sequencing, given your gene expression, your genome, what are the right foods for you? We started doing a little bit of work with academic partners of ours and some companies around microbiome typing of the food as well. We're looking to add flavor and texture profile to foods as well, just expanding the data. And ultimately, I think this is endless. We can start talking about traceability, the provenance of food, blockchain technology of tracking it, and so on and so forth. And then there is so much more research to understand the pathways in which food as a medicine impacts the body, the biological pathways, the gut-brain axis, how it impacts the mental health. So there's a lot more to be learned there in terms of the compounds in food. I mean, right now we deal with about 170 molecules, proteins, carbs, fat, amino acids, fatty acids, so on and so forth, but there is over 26,000 molecules in food. And so we interesting question would be, what are the compounds in garlic that cure the common cold? We have to first understand that. It's got to be some primary chemical analysis of garlic to understand all the compounds in garlic, and then figure out, okay, well, what are the molecules and how they, bind with, receptors in your body to essentially cure the common cold. So those are very interesting questions. So we see that as a 50-year project, but constantly expanding. But right now, it's the basis of nutrients, allergens, diets, and trying to help people make choices around those parameters.
Wow. So you're basically taking foods or meals and then breaking them down to these tags or attributes that people can then use in their individual applications to serve up in some consumer-friendly way at the end of the day. That's what, and what you're saying is that the tags that you can add on to foods is going to keep increasing as we get more and more information about, food body interactions, right?
Yeah.
And how it, and you're really talking about going beyond just that. You're saying, hey, we can actually suggest foods based on your specific genotype that work best with you. So you're talking about personalization at a level, at a genetic level here.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually the dream is even bigger than that. It's personalization, not just based on who you are, but where you are and when you are in the time of day. We're looking at technologies that are not that far away in the future. They're already existing, where you can get real-time biochemistry analysis of your blood, and not just glucose, but a bunch of biomarkers, which can be combined with things like smart toilets that can take real-time microbiome analysis and whatnot. And then we can say, okay, well, knowing what's in your blood right now, and what's in your microbiome, and knowing what you had for breakfast, and knowing your preferences about flavor and so on and so forth. It's 11 a.m. Here is at noon for lunch, a few, 3 different dishes in those 3 restaurants at this price that you can choose. That is kind of the vision, a virtual nutritionist that is very low touch, no need to log in food, just be able to really kind of direct people, and not just towards health, but also enjoyment, because big part of the healthiness of food comes from its enjoyment.
Yeah, I was hoping you were going to say something about taste, but I feel, Gary, like I'm sitting in a Star Trek episode where I'm asking the replicator to make me food, and it's saying, hey, okay, stick your finger here. I need to know exactly what you need right now.
Yes, I'll tell you exactly what you need right now. Or you're standing in front of the shelf in the grocery store, and this is what you should buy right now.
Yeah, but this is fascinating stuff, Gary. I mean, this is, of course, we've talked about wellness and helping people, guiding people to smarter choices, but this is taking it to a whole new level.
Yeah. So Victor, I'm curious, on your team then, do you have, nutritionists or dietitians? Because one of the things we've seen, and I seems to surface different retailers I talk to, when they start talking about this area, each retailer, certainly the larger ones, have their own dietitians or nutritionists on staff and so on. And everybody's got their own sort of special take on, the nutritional profile of this food or that food and how it aligns to that health condition and so on. Do you encounter that much, or do you find that people across the industry pretty readily accept your recommendations?
I think, and not to sound wishy-washy, I think the answer is both. So to answer your first question, yes, we do have nutritionists and stuff, and we use them as needed. The issue is not the actually underlying data that which we provide, but how it's interpreted. And that's where dietitians come. So if you're a dietitian in Kroger, trying to provide some kind of a, recommendation for people, you have a philosophy of what people should eat. And then you use the data that we would provide to kind of shape up, meal recommendations, suggestions for shopping, and so on and so forth. It's not to say that philosophies can be synchronized and there's a, one solution that fits all. I think there is a level of personalization. I think there is a lot more that dietitians and nutritionists need to learn in terms of how to provide foods, because right now it's very functional. And I come from a background where I cook a lot. So for me, taste and flavor and enjoyment of food are very important. So that needs to be taken into account as well. So I would say that people use us because of the breadth and depth of the data and its accuracy. So even if you have like very fringe situations, somebody with type 2 diabetes that has comorbidity of kidney disease and hypertension, and they cannot eat onions, and they're married to somebody that has peanut allergies and so on and so forth, we can provide suggestions of what people should eat. While an individual dietitian nutritionist usually doesn't have that scope of data. They work with 20, 30 meals that they know that are healthy. Yeah. But if you give them, those fringe requirements, they struggle. And so that we support to some extent the industry and everybody that's a dietitian nutritionist by providing them with data and tools to really quickly find the right meals. So we have a search engine on top of our data that allows you to do very complex queries like the ones I described right now. Yeah. And we have ability to look up data. So a kind of long-winded answer, but hopefully I got to what you were asking.
So I got a question, Victor. So when you say, you're pulling to this data, what kind of verification is involved in that data so that people can trust what your system puts out?
Yeah. So let's put it this way. It is as verifiable as what a nutritionist would do. So just to run people through the various options of how nutrition data comes into being. The most reliable way is you burn the food in a lab, you do chemical analysis, and then you realize those are the nutrients, calories, fat, protein, vitamin B, C, D. So the gold standard is you do the same analysis in 3 different labs at 3 different times, you cross-triangulate and you come up with a solution. Now, needless to say, that's very expensive. Each individual burn is probably about $1,000. And so if you do it 3 times, that's $3,000 per food. And it makes sense if you're selling millions of, individual items of the same food, like if you're Kraft Heinz or General Mills and whatnot, right. The data comes from there. The USDA does something similar. And so the USDA database is based essentially on this kind of analysis. And we use USDA as the primary source of basic nutrient information, as well as 9 other sources that are similar. Some of them are governments from different countries, some of them are private data sets and whatnot. The second level of providing nutrition information is really nutritionists. And nutritionists have learned how to read a text, let's say a recipe or ingredient list, and say, aha, here I see, 1 cup of green peas and half an onion and whatnot. And they know what it means in terms of the quantity of the particular food. They actually call those databases of USDA and so on and so forth, and then kind of build a composite nutrient picture of the foods. And then there is the analysis of the actual cooking process. What happens when you fry something, how much oil gets absorbed? What does salt and pepper to taste mean? So we solve for the same thing. So our level of accuracy is the same as a nutritionist. And we have been tested by clients against, nutritionists with chemically analyzed recipes. And we know that we achieve human level accuracy as good as somebody with 20 years of experience. And then the last level of nutrition information is the one that most people actually, unfortunately, use. Is kind of the free data out there online. Which is getting better over time, and not to, lots of companies have put in effort into that, but there is a lot of kind of free floating, not very accurate information that doesn't necessarily refer to chemically analyzed data and so on and so forth. So the reliability, we are never claiming ourselves that we provide the most accurate data because we haven't done chemical analysis on 5 million recipes and 1 million foods. But we have used the underlying data and basically done the work of a nutritionist to analyze those 5 million recipes and 1 million foods and tag them along. So it is as accurate as it gets, given the situation. Now, I hope that one day there will be a lab that can analyze foods very, very quickly, and it will be very cheap. And then it will become almost intuitive that, when you order a meal in a restaurant, before it comes to you, the it goes through a scanner, which kind of tells you, this is what's in the food.
Yep.
And by the way, beware. I know you have peanut allergies, but somebody used the dish 3 meals ago, and there's like traces of peanuts that are that content. If you want to, return it.
So what about that? That's fascinating. So clearly you have a number of sources that you're pulling your data from, in addition to nutritionists, which guarantees some kind of accuracy around the information you're providing.
Yeah.
What about, I've heard this a lot, and this is just a question you can choose to either, it could be a stupid one, you can choose not to answer it. But what about quality of ingredients? I've heard a lot from people that I've spoken to about nutrition say, people getting the right amount of nutrients is not really the problem in a lot of cases. In a lot of cases, it's the quality of ingredients they're actually putting in. Like somebody buying, I might be eating a kale salad, but if it's not an organic kale salad, it's different from eating because it's got pesticides and other stuff in it. So is there a way you think you can account for things like that?
Yes and no. In the short term, I think no, because a lot of the meal recommendations we provide to people are related to generic food. So if you're making a kale salad, we'll say, you get 1 bunch of kale and serve 6 people and whatnot. We don't have information of the actual kale that the person is buying. Are they buying organic kale? Are they buying non-organic kale? Which retailer? And then it gets even more complicated. Where was the kale grown? And what was the soil that it grew up in? When was it picked? And so on and so forth. So that is to say that we are aware of the problem, and that it will be eventually solved, and we're working towards solving it, but there is a lot of missing pieces that need to come together. So it's not a lack of technology, it's a lack of making it cheap enough and integrate enough to be able to do full traceability. So some folks have done that. I think Sweet Green, if I'm not mistaken,
Right.
one of their competitors did the same thing with tomatoes. So they actually could see where the tomato was grown at what time and whatnot. And there's blockchain technology to actually track each individual food. I mean, theoretically, you can track each individual grain of rice by using CRISPR technology to genetically modify every grain, and then you can, if you want to go to that extent. Right. But it's not cheap, right? Somebody's actually got to log the data, somebody's got to do the work, and then it's got to trace it. But ultimately, yes, I think if we're talking about health and longevity and food as medicine, that is absolutely of importance. I personally buy only organic food from the farmers market, and I know the farmers, I know where they grow the food and whatnot. But I think this knowledge has to be available to everyone because it does make a difference. It's the level of micronutrients that you get in the food, and that is becoming more and more prominent. We keep thinking about macronutrients and how important is the proportion of fat to protein to carbs. But in reality, the availability of vitamins and minerals and polyphenols are very, very important for the gut microbiome health and your overall health. And so in the fruits and vegetables and animals that eat them that are grown in a place with depleted soil, non-organic, they lack those micronutrients, and even worse, they probably have some detrimental molecules that are in the food that probably impair your health. So eventually we want to get to that point. Right now we're too far away from it.
Yeah, well, and then Shekar, that brings to mind a related issue that I think we've heard is, how's the food prepared, right? So, right. I can have zucchini, for example, and if I fry it, obviously it's got one nutritional profile. If I bake it, it's got a different profile, etc. How do you approach that?
Yeah, so we have the very basic approach that a nutritionist will do. So we know what is the impact of each cooking technique on each food, and again, those are averaged out. Yep. We know if you fry something, how much oil gets absorbed, but if you braise something, how much water gets added or subtracted if you bake it or things like that, and how specific nutrients might be impacted. Like if you do juicing, how much of the fiber gets removed and stuff like that. There's a lot more work to be done. There is primary research to be done there because not everything is known. We don't know for every single plant or even meat, different techniques, what is the impact. Now, and that's on average, like each individual piece obviously will take in each individual cooking and temperature impact and the humidity in the room that you're cooking, that it impacts the overall nutrition. But I think directionally, at least as a first level approximation, we're providing some information now into how the food is impacted based on cooking. There's a lot more to be done, and I put my faith there in smart technologies, Internet of Things that are in the home. So smart ovens that can in real time track the micronutrient change of the food while you're cooking it, or pans, and not that those don't exist, they're just not commercially viable as of yet. So
yeah
no, this is fascinating, because I'm trying to see how does let's say somebody who's trying to build an application on top of your services, what would be, just throw out if you can, like a potential use case here.
Yeah. So we serve 2-3 primary use cases, and they roughly fall into different industries. So in the food industry, generally it's providing nutrition data for something that people are cooking, like recipes or ingredient lists of foods and so on and so forth. So this is the use case we saw for Barilla, but we do have, other use cases, provide recipes for somebody that already has an idea what they want, like Tyson, around meats, or McCormick uses us, to do a little bit of machine learning, I guess, on top of our data, that's associated with their own data. But it is basically getting data around meals, and we power the nutrition for Food Network and New York Times Cooking and America's Test Kitchen and Chowhound. So a lot of the big recipe sites use us to essentially provide the nutrition data for recipes. So that's one use case. The second use case, which happens to be in the health and wellness industry primarily, is personalized meal recommendations. And this is the example I ran before of kind of the fringe case of somebody that has a lot of restrictions, and they're eating with somebody that has restrictions, or they have just bought asparagus and they don't like onions, and so on and so forth. So this is leveraging essentially our full database of 5 million recipes, 1 million foods, and the search engine on top of it to be able to create in real time recommendations of what people should eat. So that's the second use case, and health and wellness companies use it to provide dietary recommendations and meal planning for particular chronic conditions or wellness. Corporate wellness programs use us as well, like BSDI and FoodSmart. So those are the platforms. So this is the second use case, and the third use case is the very straightforward nutrition data lookup. And a lot of the app developers that come and sign up for APIs are just wanting that. They want to create maybe a food logging application, and they want to be able to process a query like, oh, I had 2 eggs and a toast for breakfast. And so tell me what's the nutrition information in 2 eggs and a toast. And essentially that's what we do. We kind of go process, we know what it
that's something like a fitness pal application would do.
Yeah, right. And there is, obviously, we would like to eventually get into the chatbot situation, telehealth, and say, well, what do you mean by 2 eggs? Are they fried or boiled? Because there's a difference in nutrition information, and so on and so forth. But at the very least, that's kind of, so those are the 3 use cases: providing nutrition data for meals, personalized meal recommendations, and then just nutrition data lookup.
Wow. So let's talk about your vision. I know we talked about it briefly when we met at grocery shop, and where you'd like to see. I know you talked about, you think that people can live a full life, 120 years, chronic free, if they eat the right foods and have the information. So how do you see, what do you think are the pieces that have to come together to make that happen? It can't just be information about food, right? There's so much marketing that seems to be misleading for people. You have the pharma industry that's promoting a certain thing. I mean, it seems like there's a bunch of factors here that have to come together to make this happen, right?
Yeah, so the answer is two-pronged. Like, so on the one hand is technologies and combining them to provide a meaningful solution for people. And I mentioned a bunch of those technologies, anything from real-time blood chemistry and smart toilets to smart agriculture, being able to reduce the cost of food. And I think this is a humongous part of the solution, which we are not going to be involved with. But the reality, and as you probably guys know, most people buy food based on price and convenience, and health and wellness comes to be, fifth or sixth consideration. Maybe that changed in the last couple of years, but it's still not in the top two. So the challenge is, how do we make healthy food that is cheaper and more convenient than a Big Mac? That's the challenge. And there's a lot of technologies there. There is regenerative agriculture, robots that seed, that irrigate, drones that deliver, which shortens the supply chain, and so on and so forth. So lots of technology there, blockchain tracking for, nutrient content for sure. And then, so this is kind of on the supply of food. On the demand of food, which is kind of the second problem, how do we change the mentality, the behavior change? And that's one of the toughest nuts to crack. So many people have tried. There's Alcoholics Anonymous exists because people, cannot get rid of, stop drinking. And it's the same thing with food. If your body and the microbiome is used to the same foods that are not very good for you, it requires, willpower, for lack of a better word, to change that. Well, it's not necessarily the case. I believe that you can create healthy, delicious food that helps people move, but there's got to be an effort on behalf of industry as a whole. The way how government plus industry tackled, well, government minus industry, but tackled smoking, right? There was an education program. It took 20, 30 years to switch habits. And I think with food is going to be the same thing. There's going to be education program that's government subsidized, and then companies have to start getting involved. And I think the big companies that are ultimately going to make the difference are seeing where the wind is blowing, and they're starting to change tack. And we all know about the initiatives within Nestle and Unilever and the big food companies to just move towards healthy food, reduce sugar, move away from, get clean labels and so on and so forth. So this is happening. The other thing that I think is going to be very helpful is that the healthcare industry is moving in that direction as well.
Yeah.
So especially the pandemic accelerated that, and it's driven by customer demand. But people said, well, look, my immune system is compromised. What can I do? And one of the first things is food. And so they started to get a lot more interested. And so now the healthcare companies are saying, well, we need to do prevention. It's not, it's not just like healthcare. Let's just be health, and so food is an important element. So a lot of the companies we're talking now, either health plans or corporate wellness programs, population health programs, they're all towards prevention. And so that's part of the changing of the mentality, right? It's the big companies that are the service providers are moving in that direction, as well as pharma companies, because even though they're selling drugs, food is a drug. In essence, that's what it's a medicine. And so alongside those drugs, you want to complement with food. And we talk to, for example, blood chemistry analysis companies. And they come to us and they say, well, look, our clients are telling us, stop selling us just supplements. That was what else we can eat in addition to, vitamin D and vitamin K that you're selling us, what else can we eat? So I think the industry is changing, but it's going to take 20 or 30 years. And a lot of those pieces have to fall together, and it's going to be a little bit messy. But at some point, the understanding that health and wellness depends on food is going to be part of the psyche of the society, and I think these things will change that. So
yeah, and Gary, I think we've read plenty of reports that say that I think the grocery industry and the supermarket industry have a huge role to play here, because obviously that's where we go to buy foods.
Yes.
And it looks like they're, uniquely positioned to drive some of this messaging and this awareness and make some of these foods accessible, demystify the labeling process, make the process of selecting these foods easier, right?
Yeah. And I think that, you're right on, and I didn't mention the grocery industry. Obviously, that's that's why we're here. But yeah, they have a humongous impact that they can, and it's already happening. I mean, you know, the initiatives Kroger has and Walmart has, and I think especially retailers that have pharmacy and grocery in the same space are going to make a big difference, because as you know, in some places in the US, you can already get reimbursed for buying groceries, you know, as a medical bill. And I think that if you can go to your pharmacy and in addition to your pills, you get a prescription of a meal plan, and then you go buy the groceries and you get reimbursed, that's going to be huge. So and so eventually that's going to move, and it's also going to be in the way the store layout works, you know, where what foods are you seeing, you know, where is the healthy food? And so there's a lot that's been discussed around that, but I think
because you know, the impact of doing this is huge, right, Victor? I mean, it's you know, it's an impact on the economy, it's an impact on productivity of people, their overall well-being, whether it's physical or mental. I mean, the impact is just massive. And I think we keep talking about this, Gary, is that the supermarket industry and grocery industry is sitting squarely in the middle of people's lives, and they have such a huge role that they can play here. So if there's any retailers out there listening, I want you to pay close attention to what is being said here.
Yeah, no, there's a huge opportunity for supermarkets and the grocery industry to, you know, provide education, provide guidance to relevant and beneficial products around the stores, suggest meal plans, recipes. No, massive opportunity here.
Yeah,
do you see the awareness changing generationally, Victor? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. I'll get to that. Let me just say that I see that for the retail industry, for the grocery retail industry, what's interesting is that you actually are probably going to get market share from the healthcare industry, and so that's the biggest industry that there is. You know, 16% of GDP is there.
Right.
So yeah, generationally, absolutely. We did actually a white paper a few years ago looking at the habits of Gen Zs, and Gen Z are actually putting food on top of their social priority lists, like even more than you know, spending time on Instagram or Discord or whatever it is. It's having food with friends is the most important social activity, and they place very, very big emphasis on the healthfulness of foods, you know, where it comes from, that it's prepared well, and also on its climate impact. So I think when they come into full economic power, things are going to shift very fast. I mean, the millennials are already moving that direction, but I got to kind of assimilate it in the machine. But I think the Gen Zs are gonna move it, because there's going to be a lot more dollars that are siphoned towards eating healthy, and you see it by the explosion of new product development in the food industry. You know, that is catering essentially to that. You know, it's like cleaner labels, healthier, much better for you. So.
Yeah.
So true. Yesterday, I got a text from my daughter, who's a freshman in college, and she said, we should stop buying this brand of water. And I said, why? She says, oh, because they add this, this, and this, and the plastics that they source is not in line with what I would support. And so I'm finding that, you know, somebody who's 18 years old has pretty hard when I was 18 years old, I never cared about these things, right? It seems like the availability of information, and then just the overall social awareness that we all need to do something together to make something happen seems to be pretty, I mean, it's very encouraging. It's very exciting to see people having that kind of stance at that early an age.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It is encouraging, and I'm very hopeful.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, wow. I mean, Gary, this has been a fantastic conversation. I mean, I think most people listening to this episode are going to have to rewind and listen to it a couple of times to really grab everything that's been said here. I mean, Victor, this is incredibly rich, and I think I'd say even prophetic information, right? Because you're talking about things that can just not happen the next 2 to 3 years. You're talking about what should be happening in the next 20, 30 years for us to kind of turn the ship around.
Yeah.
And I think it's definitely, people should be listening to this very, very closely, and then see what you can do, whether you're a startup in this space or you're a supermarket. What can you do to bring that focus into your business, and how can you help people with this? I think it's such a noble goal. So
yeah, Absolutely,
No,
absolutely.
yeah.
And what is very helpful is that all the technology is here already. It's
Yes.
just a question of putting together to work. It's kind of like almost, the iPhone before the iPhone existed. All the technology was there, but
Right.
somebody had to put it together to actually make work. And it's, 20, 30, 50 years, it doesn't matter. It's a question of working towards and getting it done.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Well, Victor, time has flown by here, but I tell you what, we'd love to get you back on here in a few months from now to talk about, other exciting stuff that's been happening at Edamam. But I wanted to let you know in the meanwhile that if you do send us your mailing address, we'll send you a Retail Perch mug. So next time you can have some organic coffee with us on this call.
Excellent.
Be back on this podcast. Any closing thoughts, Victor, of how people can you? And
no, I think thank you very much for the opportunity. Hopefully, what we discuss here lands on some willing ears of decision makers in the retail space, in the grocery retail space, and accelerates change. So that's all I hope for.
Terrific. Gary, any closing thoughts?
No, this has been great. And to your earlier point, Shekar, I think there's a lot here to unpack. So I think we will find a lot of retailers, food producers, manufacturers, tech startups, everybody wanting to really pay attention to this and probably listen to it a couple times.
Yeah, and Gary, we're moving up in the world. I don't know if you know that, but the Retail Perch podcast has its own LinkedIn page now.
Wow.
Got our own little website.
Congratulations.
So we're moving up here. So, pretty soon, Gary, you're going to be charging appearance fees. So
we're growing up.
Yeah. Well, we've been, I think, extremely fortunate by having some amazing guests. And of course, Victor is just adding a cherry on top of this podcast. So Victor, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to seeing you back here. And folks, as usual, if you guys have any questions for us to ask Victor, email us theretailperch@birdseye.com. You can find us on our LinkedIn page. You can certainly connect with us there. And we look forward to speaking to you again. Again, thank you, Victor, and hope you have a wonderful week and a wonderful rest of the year.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Make sure to join us every Monday and connect with us at the Retail Perch on Instagram and Facebook.
And if you have any questions, feel free to email us at theretailperch@birdseye.com.
Until next time, this is Shekar.
And this is Gary signing off.